Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mia and some of you know me as Blush Designs Co, which is my small business. In today's video, I'm going to be going over my complete sewing guide for beginners. I have wanted to film a video like this for a very long time, and since I am starting to get more into tutorial style videos and sharing some of my tips and tricks when it comes to sewing and small business, then I figured now would be the perfect time, especially since we're approaching the holidays. Maybe you've asked for a sewing machine for Christmas. Maybe you've bought yourself a sewing machine to learn how to sew for the holidays. So today we are going to be busting out my domestic sewing machine. I have a Singer heavy duty machine. This is the first sewing machine I've ever purchased in my life. I am self-taught. I've taught myself everything through YouTube tutorials, Reddit, online, Google, so many different things. So now I'm going to show you guys all the things that I've learned, some of my tips and tricks, some beginner sewing drills. I will have a full list of all the supplies that I'm using, my sewing machine and everything in the description, so you can definitely check that out. Some of them are affiliate links if they're from Amazon. You by all means don't have to purchase from it, but I just wanted to preface that. And without further ado, let's just get right into showing you guys around the machine. I have my machine here. This is my Singer heavy duty. I have had this machine ever since I started sewing, which I think is about 3.5 years ago. And she has been very good to me. I have had little to no issues really with the machine. There are a few things that I think over time, as the machine starts to wear down, this is definitely not the most expensive starter machine that you could get. I got it on sale at Michael's. I had a coupon. So I think this machine ranges in between like $300 to about $375, depending on like what the sale is, if there's a sale. But I think that this is a very good beginner machine. They have a few different models of these Singer machines, so there's a few different types of brands that you can go with. Today I'm just going to be showing you this one because this is the only one that I have. The main functions on the machine will kind of remain the same. Some little things might vary from machine to machine, but the main core parts that I'm going to show you are going to be pretty universal across all of the machines. The first thing on the machine is the two dials on this side here. The bottom one will be different types of stitches. Now this machine has so many different types. I don't really use any of the other options besides the straight stitch and the zigzag stitch. I've also used the button stitch a few times. So those are the only stitches that I really use on this machine for the projects that I sew. But if you're interested in using other different stitches, it has so many different types that you can use. Then the length dial will determine the length of your stitch. So if you're doing a straight stitch, it will determine how big the stitches are. So typically I keep mine at around like 2-ish. You can play around with it as you go. As you start to go up to like number 4, it then becomes more of like a basting stitch, and then as you get lower to like 0, it becomes super tiny. So I would just recommend kind of playing around with it, but I found that the sweet spot for me is in between like 2 to 3, kind of leaning more towards the 2. That's where I keep mine at. I don't really change it unless I am sewing a ruffle or something like that. Then the dial on the top that says width, it only really matters when you're doing a zigzag stitch. If you change the width while you're sewing a straight stitch, it's not going to make a difference. So if you're sewing a zigzag stitch, it will determine how zigzaggy your zigzags are, for a lack of a better term. It will determine how big the peaks are, and I'll kind of put up a little diagram here if you're interested, but it will determine how mountainous the zigzags are. I don't really know what the word is to describe it. Then your needle position will determine if your needle is in the center or if it's more towards the left, if it's more towards the right. And I really honestly don't use this, and I don't think I've ever used this ever since I've used my machine. Tension is important. This is going to be the tension of your top thread, and for me, I found that the sweet spot is at 4. I again do not really mess with this unless I need to up the tension a tiny bit, but ever since getting my machine, I really haven't adjusted this tension at all. I do move the tension only if I'm going to be doing ruffles for my machine. I just turn it all the way up, but when I'm sewing regular stitches, zigzag stitches, like I don't really mess with the tension at all. Then this little silver stick right here is going to be where you place your bobbins. This is how you're going to wind up your bobbin, and I'll show you how to wind up a bobbin in just a second. And then the back spool here, it is like a little plastic spool, and you also have one in like the inner handle part of the machine. This is where I put my thread to rest when I am sewing. And then we have all of these little metal parts here, which is what you're going to use when you are actually threading your machine. This is important to kind of really learn how to thread your machine. Your machine should come with a manual, and it really does tell you how to thread your machine, but I am going to show you in this video. But if you're curious as to how to thread your specific machine, a lot of machines have numbers on them, and you kind of just just pull your thread through and follow along, and you can also look it up in your manual that it comes with. This little lever here is the reverse button, and this is going to back stitch for you. So every time I start and stop a stitch, I will do a back stitch when I start and a back stitch when I stop. That way it will lock the stitch in place. If you don't back stitch, you will be able to just pull your thread out. So depending on what project you're doing and what part you're sewing. This little wheel on the side of the machine here is your hand wheel. I use this a lot when I'm sewing zippers or sewing over really bulky fabrics. This is basically just going to manually move your wheel, and you always want to turn your wheel towards you and never away from you. I also use this a lot to make sure that my needle is in the upright position before lifting up my presser foot and moving my fabric around. You want to make sure that your needle is all the way up when you finish a stitch before you lift your presser foot and pull your project out. Otherwise you risk nesting at the bottom, or you risk breaking and pulling your needle right off. This little case on the bottom here is your bobbin case. You will click this little black button and your bobbin case will come up, and then that's where you store your bobbin in. I'm going to show you how to put your bobbin in. Here is your machine's throat space. It has a plate where it has measurements here, so when you're doing seam allowances and stuff, you can kind of eyeball it with that. You have your presser foot, and then you have your needle, and on the back of the machine you have your little presser foot lever that lifts your foot up and down. It also has this little pocket at the front of my machine where I store some little notions in there, and then this machine, the throat of it actually does come off. As a self-proclaimed hobby girl, I'm always trying to find new things to do and ways to spice up my free time, and also just ways to enrich myself, especially during this time off during my rebrand. I've been dabbling into new hobbies and trying to learn new skills that are going to help me in both my fun life but also my business life. And thanks to the sponsors of this week's video, Skillshare, I have been able to continuously evolve my skills and always be learning something new with their amazing platform. Skillshare is the largest online learning community built for creatives and small business owners and hobby girls and creative professionals. They have thousands of online classes led by industry professionals, so think illustrators, photographers, videographers, small business owners, and so many more. I've talked a lot about how I want to learn how to sew clothes, and one thing about me is I like to watch a lot of videos and tutorials and things about what I want to tackle, so that when it comes down to actually starting it, I have a lot of preconceived knowledge and things that I know going into the project, so I can kind of go into it blind but not really. So on the topic of wanting to sew clothes, I have been really trying to gather as much knowledge as possible when it comes to the basics and the foundations. I've been loving Denise Bayron's class on the foundations of sewing your own clothes. I think that her instructions are very simple, but then the visuals that she adds is also an added element because I truly love looking at something rather than just hearing it. So I really love how those both complement each other. I love that all the classes are less than like 15 minutes, so I'm able to just quickly watch something while I'm cooking, while I'm prepping dinner, feeding the cats, and I can easily just flick through them at my own pace, and I don't have to commit to like an hour-long video. So that definitely helps with my current schedule. So if you're a creative, girly, or small business owner, then Skillshare is giving the first 500 people to click the link in my description or scan the QR code here on the screen a free 1-month trial to Skillshare Premium. So you have an entire month to play around on their website and find a class that you like and potentially learn some new skills while you're at it. So thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Some of my favorite beginner supplies for sewing. You're definitely going to need thread. Now there are so many different types of thread that you can use. My favorite is the Gutermann brand. As you can see, it's all the thread that I own. I just use the polyester because I'm not sewing anything that needs to be heated. So you don't want to use polyester because it will just melt right off in the heat. So if you're planning on sewing like bowl koozies and things that have to go in the microwave, or like pot covers that need to withstand a lot of heat, then definitely use cotton. But if you're just sewing like sleeves, laptop sleeves, and things like that, then you can definitely use just polyester thread. They have so many different sizes of thread. This I like to use for my top thread. I buy a cream color for my top thread and I buy a white color for my bobbin, and this is what I've used to sew for like the last 2 years. I also buy smaller spools of colored thread for different types of fabrics if I'm doing top stitching or like just different decorative stitches. So I like to buy the smaller versions of these because I'm usually not using a whole bobbin for colored thread. You're also going to want a lot of plastic bobbins. You're probably going to need a lot more bobbins than you think, especially if you plan on starting a small business with sewing or sewing a lot of projects, or you want to do markets and you want to sew a lot of product for that. You're going to need a lot of these. I would definitely suggest getting a pack of these off of Amazon. You can get like a pack of 30 on Amazon, and you can pre-wind all of your bobbins. You can also buy pre-wound bobbins. I have never done that. I don't personally like to do that. I just like to use the same brand of thread for my bobbin and top thread so that I know that I'm using quality thread for both. You can totally buy pre-wound bobbins if you want to save some time, but I just start my projects by winding up like 4 or 5 bobbins, and then I have as many bobbins as I need to finish my project, and that way I'm not stopping and starting winding the bobbins in between every step every time it runs out. Another thing to have on hand is replacement needles. I like to have needles of a variety of sizes and weights. This helps me pick the right needle for my fabric type and make sure that I'm not using too thin of a needle with too thick of a fabric and vice versa. So I'd like to have a bunch of needles on hand. I typically am using usually heavier duty heavier duty needles because I'm typically sewing over zippers and sewing over very thick pieces of fabric, batting lots of layers. So I'm typically using the heavier weight needles. But if you're doing quilting or you're working with lightweight fabrics like silk, then you definitely want to get a lighter weight needle that is made for that fabric. Two of my holy grails when it comes to sewing is a good pair of fabric scissors and my rotary blade. These two are like my saving grace when it comes to sewing because these make prepping the fabric and cutting it so much easier. I'm not fighting with the fabric. I'm not having to cut it a billion times because my scissors don't work. My number one tip is do not use these for anything else but fabric because they will dull so quickly and you will have to buy a new pair. But investing in a good pair of fabric scissors and a rotary blade, definitely going to be good if you plan on sewing a lot of projects. Now you're going to need something to keep your fabric together when you're sewing. Some people like to use pins, some people like to use clips. I am a clip lover. I love sewing clips. I do not prefer pins at all. The only time I use pins is if I'm sewing something that's inside of a fabric and not clipping it around the edges. So sewing pockets on typically is what I'm using a pin for, but I love my clips. I have 2 packs of 100 and I just have it in this little basket here. I use these every time I sew. They are so great. These are the best. These are the smaller versions. I know that they have some bigger sewing clips on Amazon as well. You can get a variety of them and I love them so much. Last but not least, you're gonna want a cutting mat. I have a few different sizes, one on my desk back there, and I also have a smaller one and then I have an even bigger one. Depending on what size your table is or how much area you have to work with in your house, get a cutting mat that works for you, but definitely invest in one of those. I think it's gonna be your best friend when it comes to sewing. Okay, so let's start with winding our machine for the first time. You're gonna wanna place your spool here on the top of that plastic stick, and then we're going to take our thread and we're gonna just follow the numbers on the machine. So number 1, you put it through here and hook it underneath that little clamp. We're gonna put it through here, and we are going to then pull it down. Then we are going to pull it down through this canal and then up through this one. And we are going to pull it up and through this little hook again. And then we're going to pull it down again through this channel. And then right here, there is a little like hook. You're going to pull your thread behind this hook and into the neck. And then we're going to just thread this through our machine, through the eye of the needle, and then pull it out on the back like that. Then in order to finish with this, you're just gonna pull it through the little crevice on the foot and pull it backwards. Now for our bobbin, I'm taking color number 20 with the polyester Gutermann thread. This is my favorite, it's just a white thread. And we're gonna place it on the spool where we placed our top thread. You can place your top thread just gently over to the side for now. Sometimes the thread, when it's new, can come a little bit frayed. So what I like to do is I just like to snip off that frayed edge. So for the bobbin, you want to pull the thread, and we're going to use this little nut here, and you're going to follow the little diagram. So it says you put it through like this, and then you pull it through like this, and this is going to create tension on it. Then you're going to grab your empty bobbin. You're going to find where the hole is open, take the end of your thread, push it through the top, grab it with your other hand and pull it through. You want to keep a decent amount of tail at the top so that we have enough to hold on to. Then you're going to place it on your bobbin winder, and in order to switch the machine over from using the actual top thread to winding the bobbin, you're going to push your tab over and then it's going to click, and then you know that it's time to wind your bobbin. You're going to turn your machine on, and then you're going to use your foot, press down on the presser foot and hold this top thread tightly so you don't lose it. And we're going to wind the bobbin a few times so that it can lock in the thread and we don't lose this tail. So now we've done that a few times, we can let go of that. I like to trim it a little bit so it doesn't have a super long tail and it doesn't get caught. And now we're gonna go ahead and wind our bobbin. Pull your bobbin off of the top, you're gonna push it again to the left, and then you're gonna pull it up, and then cut that thread off. And now you have a fresh bobbin and we're gonna place it in our machine now. So I'm gonna turn my machine off so that I don't sew through my finger. Now, when we're doing our bobbin, a trick that I found online was to always make sure that you're inserting your bobbin into the machine like a P. You don't wanna insert it like a B because then it's gonna get caught and that's not the proper way. So I'm making sure that my bobbin is in a P format. And now I'm gonna press on this little black lever and it's gonna pop open the bobbin case. And we're just gonna set that to the side. Your bobbin case also should have a little diagram of how you should load it into your machine, so you can follow that. Now we are going to place our bobbin inside of the bobbin case, and there are these little slits here. You're gonna slide your thread in between this little slit and pull it around. Now you're gonna wanna hold your top thread and you're gonna wanna hold it taut and use your hand wheel to make a stitch, and it's going to pull up that bobbin thread. And then you can just use your finger, pull that thread all the way through, and there your bobbin is now threaded. So you have both strings towards the back of your machine. You can go ahead and replace your bobbin case and you're all ready to sew. So we're going to take some scrap fabric. This can be fabric that you've thrifted, found at the thrift store, an old t-shirt, like honestly an old bed sheet, or just some fabric that you have scraps of. I have so many different scraps, and we're going to practice some straight stitches. It is very difficult to get straight stitches, so don't be discouraged if when you're sewing for the first time your stitches aren't perfectly straight. As you start to sew more and sew different projects and kind of follow along the side of the project, you're going to start to get better at sewing straight stitches. I still can't sew completely straight, and I've been sewing for 3.5 years. So just take it with time, get to practicing, and just start sewing projects. Honestly, that's how I started. I sewed a tote bag for the very first time and for the very first project that I ever did. So just take your time and don't get discouraged. But let's turn our machine on and let's sew our very first line together. In order to sew, you're going to take 2 pieces of fabric. Doesn't matter what kind of fabric. If your fabric has a right side, which means the pretty side, the more vibrant side, if you have a piece of patterned fabric like this is going to be the right side and this is going to be the wrong side. So pretty sides together when sewing. Taking 2 pieces of fabric, pretty sides facing each other, you're going to line up your fabric. I always use 1/4 of an inch seam. I work in seam allowances that are in inches. My machine has 5/8 of an inch. Typically I use the 5/8 of an inch, or I would honestly use the edge of the presser foot. I know that a lot of people do that, and when doing seam allowances, when I started sewing and like figuring out tutorials, I always just use the edge of my presser foot. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's what I typically do. So while you're practicing your straight stitches, you can do that. My number 1 tip for getting stitches to be straight is not to look directly at the needle, to look at where the edge of your fabric is. Keeping it aligned with whatever line on your machine that you're doing it is going to help you get straighter of a stitch, not have your stitch be too wonky. We are going to start by putting our fabric underneath our foot. I'm going to line it up with the edge of my foot foot just for ease of showing you guys. And then we're gonna lower our presser foot. This little lever in the back here, lower it down so that it can sandwich our fabric between the feed dogs and our presser foot, because that's what's gonna help our fabric go through the machine. It's not us pushing it, it's the feed dogs pushing it, and we're just guiding it. So we're gonna start, and I'm gonna show you guys how to backstitch. When you start, you're going to push down this little reverse once you start stitching. So I'm gonna do like 2 stitches forward, and then I'm gonna do 2 or 3 stitches backward. Now that we've locked in our beginning stitch, I'm gonna go ahead and sew a straight line all the way to the end, and then back stitching when we get to the end. Now we're gonna backstitch now that we've got to the end. Now, our needle is still in the fabric, as you can see, so we need to make sure that our needle is up. My tip for that is if you're using this machine, when that little hook, silver hook, comes back up, your needle is fully up, then you can lift up your presser foot and pull your fabric out. You do not want to pull your fabric out when your needle is still in your machine where that hook is not up, because it can cause nesting on the bottom or ruin your needle. So we're going to use our hand wheel, and we are going to turn it towards us. 1 full turn until that hook comes up and our needle is up. We can see that our needle is up. Now we are going to lift up our back. We're going to lift up our presser foot. We're going to pull our project out. My machine has a thread cutter on the side here, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut my thread and pull my tail to the back. And we have done our first stitch. As you can see, if we open up our fabric, it is stitched together, and you've done your first stitch. I'm going to show you guys how to sew something together, and I'm going to show you how I like to turn the corners on my projects. We are going to start again by doing the same thing, which is lining up our project with the side of our machine. We're going to take 2 new pieces of rectangles that are the same side with pretty sides together. So you're going to take these 2 rectangles, and we're going to leave a little hole in our fabric right here, so that we can turn it right side out. So I'm gonna start by clipping my fabric. I'm gonna clip it on all of the sides with our fabric clips. I'm gonna clip it on the 3 sides, and then I'm going to mark where we're gonna leave our hole. This is very typical when sewing different projects. I find that a lot of the projects that I sew use this technique when I'm doing pockets for tote bags, if I'm doing book sleeves, liners, and things like that. So I'm gonna show you how to do this. You're gonna make a mark, I would say about 2.5 inches or so, depending on how big your rectangle is. Now, we're gonna start sewing on this side, and we're gonna go all the way around, all the way to this side, and stopping at that line, leaving this middle part unsewn. We're going to begin sewing, and we're gonna do the back stitch when we start, and we're gonna back stitch when we stop. So we're gonna line it up with the edge of the foot. Then we're going to bring our presser foot down. Start off by doing a couple stitches forward, then your back stitch, and then we're gonna get to the corner. So stopping with my needle in the fabric still, this is gonna help me turn my project so that we can continue to go the other way. I'm gonna lift up my presser foot. I'm going to turn the fabric while the needle's still inside of the fabric. Then I'm going to put the presser foot down, and then I'm gonna continue to sew. When I get close to my clip, I'm gonna stop my sewing, pull the clip out, and then continue. So we got to another corner. We're gonna do the same thing. Lift up your presser foot, turn your project, put it back down, and continue to sew. Now that we've reached the edge of our project, I'm going to back stitch to lock that stitch in. And now I'm going to turn my hand wheel to make sure that the needle is in the upright position. Then I'm going to lift up the presser foot, pull it out, cut the thread, and here we have it, our project. It is all sewn together, and our hole has been left. Now, when turning your project right side out with something like this, it's nice to clip the corners. This is gonna give you nice, clean corners. So we're gonna clip those corners. So now your project is gonna look a little something like this. And then we're going to clip these little loose threads. I just find them annoying. Now we're gonna turn this right side out by pushing it out like this. You can use the end of a pen to push out your corners. I have nails, so I'm just gonna use my nail. Like this. Now we have our little pocket. To close up this end, you can hand stitch it so that you don't see the stitches. I actually don't know how to hand stitch, so I'm going to show you how I close up my seams. And if you're using a darker color, I would definitely suggest using a thread color that matches the fabric so you don't see it as much. But since this is light, I can use the white. These edges are going to be out like this. So in order to close this up, I'm going to put my fingers in the top, fold the edges inward, and then I'm gonna pull it so that the edges get tucked inside. Now you can clip it so that you keep your pieces straight, but I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna sew a top stitch over this opening. Now, a top stitch is basically just sewing over the top of the fabric. So again, I'm gonna line it up with the edge of my foot. For this one, I'm gonna try to sew as close to the edge as possible, not lining it up with my foot, but trying to sew as close to the edge of the project as possible. So I'm going to put my fabric underneath my needle, lower my foot, start by stitching and doing a back stitch. And then I'm gonna sew along that edge all the way to the end of the opening. And then back stitching when you get to the end of that opening, making sure that our needle is up, pulling and cutting our thread. Now you can trim off the excess. And there you go. And you have a little sewn up square. If you're sewing and you get a nest of thread underneath your fabric, this can mean that your top thread is too loose and you should definitely rethread your machine. Sometimes it can mean that one of the steps were missed when you were threading your machine, or that the overall threading is just loose and you should definitely rethread it to make it a little bit more taut. If your fabric on the top is getting bunched up and puckering and looking like it's getting like smushed, your top thread is too tight, and that means your tension is probably too high, or your thread is stuck somewhere in your machine and you should rethread it. Basically with all of these, you should rethread your machine or rethread your bobbin, and usually that'll fix the issue. If you're still getting some issues and you've rethreaded your top thread, sometimes it can be the bobbin. The bobbin might not be wound properly, or it could be inserted the wrong way. Sometimes that happens if you put in your bobbin like a B and not a P. So definitely recommend checking your bobbin and winding it properly. So if you're having issues with your tension or having issues with your thread bunching up and not working properly, I would definitely suggest to rethread your machine, both the top and the bobbin, and also try it on a piece of scrap paper so that you're not sewing through a new project, messing it up, until you get your tension and your bobbin threading and your top thread down pack. I already have 2 beginner sewing tutorials on my page. I will leave them up here in the cards, down in the description, and also the thumbnails here on the screen. I have a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a book sleeve, and then I also have a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a little coin pouch and a wristlet. And they don't require a lot of fabric. You could use a fat quarter for them and be successful with your first sewing project. I hope you guys enjoyed this beginner sewing video. I'm going to be making more in this series and sewing different projects and also learning to sew new projects. If you're new, I do own a small business. Right now we're currently going through a rebrand, but I've sewn book sleeves, Kindle sleeves, pouches, makeup bags, wristlets, coin pouches for my shop, and I want to start sewing new things and learning to sew clothes. So if you want to stick around for that and learn alongside with me, then definitely subscribe to the channel. If you did enjoy this video, leave a like on the video so I know that you did enjoy it. If you have any suggestions for things that you'd want to learn how to sew, or some new things that you think I would have fun learning to sew with you guys in a vlog, then do comment that down below. But I will leave you here for now, and we will continue to learn how to sew, and I will teach you all that I know about sewing in the next few videos. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.